Well, yes, no one would argue that there's a whole lot of land in Australia. The country owns the entire territory of the continent, which covers 2.9 million square miles. Plenty of space to roam for sure. Unfortunately, not when it comes to farming, as land degradation is one of the biggest problems for both the continent and the country of Australia. Due to water and wind erosion, loss of vegetation, and salinization, more than 50% of the total area of agricultural land on the continent needs some treatment in order to grow anything useful. In general, degraded land in Australia is estimated to account for roughly 2/3 of the country's area. To put it in perspective, the global average in 2022 was just 22%. The situation would have been catastrophic if it weren't for sheep. Australians came up with the idea of taking their wool and then putting it in barren soil. Let's find out how these animals became the saviors of large parts of Australia. Check this out. The darker the country's color on this map, the more sheep it has as of 2025. People are already used to China's records, but making it to this top list is quite unusual. China's the country with the highest number of sheep in the world. Right now, while you're watching this video, around 194 million sheep are running around out there. Next to it is India, where about 75 million sheep are grazing across fields and meadows, and then comes Australia, suffering from land degradation. They've raised so many sheep that their number now exceeds just over 70 million. Why does the country need so many sheep? No, not to prevent land degradation. That's a topic for later. The main reason they raise so many sheep is for meat and wool. In 2024-25, Australia exported 657,000 tons of meat, which is 50% more than what was shipped abroad just 10 years ago. Australia has one big advantage over its competitors in this area. Australian sheep farms produce 5 to 10 times more meat per hour of labor than the rest of the world. It's perfect if you keep in mind the main downside: labor in Australia costs 10 times more than in competing countries like China. Seeing such an animal from a distance, you might not even be able to tell what species it belongs to. But when you take a closer look, it turns out to be an ordinary sheep. According to those who found it, this Australian fashionista has never been shorn in her life, and in fact, nobody took care of her. So her woolly coat weighs a whole 44 pounds. And believe it or not, this sheep isn't even that old. The lucky ones who found her say the animal has been drifting across Australia for about 6 years. And here's another relatively young sheep, which, judging by its appearance, must have been wandering in the wild even longer. Its wool weighs an unbelievable 77 pounds. On average, sheep live about 13 years, so over their lifetime, they can produce roughly twice as much wool as wild animals. Experts say the amount of wool that can be sheared throughout a sheep's life can reach 110 to 154 pounds. Can you imagine how much wool Australia has with its 70 million sheep? 45% of the world's wool production comes from Australia. All right, quantity aside, Australian wool is also about quality. And for that, we owe thanks to Australian merinos, or more accurately, to the people who brought this breed of sheep from South Africa in the 1790s. The breed adapted to the Australian conditions, and now the country produces the finest, softest sheep wool in the world. As it's claimed, no other fiber, natural or synthetic, can compare to it. Regular wool is used for bedding and home decor items, while merino wool is all about luxury clothing, high-performance apparel, and underwear. Overall, Australia is the wool capital of our planet, supplying its products to every corner of the world. But now, the wool industry, from merino to the most basic wool, is facing problems. The main reason for the problems is the price. The peak price of sheep wool was back in 2018-2019, after which there was a huge drop, down to about 800 Australian dollars for 220 pounds. And now the price is somewhere around 1,200 Australian dollars for the same amount. That's a long way from what it was during the peak price, all because of a drop in demand. In the end, there's only one option left: to store the wool in warehouses until the price goes up. However, this doesn't work for everyone because you have to pay for storage too. So another way comes up: the wool's just thrown out, as it's the only way to avoid losing even more money. But don't rush to worry about the wool, which could clearly be used more effectively than just turning it into junkyard decor. Australians have come up with a way to use the material to save their lands. For example, different companies throw wool into special machines that, in the end, produce these pellets. It's a convenient solution that's just as easy to use as regular fertilizers. This is realized by a lot of businesses that have started mass producing their products. These pellets are the perfect solution for Australian soil, which becomes infertile due to drought. Surely everyone knows about the Australian bushfires of 2019-2020. They happened because of one of the worst droughts in recent times. For example, in Sydney, there was only 0.08 inches of rain over a long period, and the temperature hit 104 degrees Fahrenheit. The most memorable result was the horrible fires, but on top of that, forests that didn't burn were completely dried out, as well as farmland in New South Wales and Queensland. The scariest thing is that, according to scientists' predictions, these droughts aren't something that showed up and disappeared for 100 years. They'll happen again and again, so the land will keep degrading more and more. This is where wood pellets enter the stage. They're capable of soaking up to 20 times their own weight in water and releasing it as the soil requires, which cuts down on the need for irrigation. It's not a silver bullet, but the positive effects are already noticeable. Some arid regions that were given pellets are much greener now. The benefits of wool don't stop there. It decomposes slowly over about 6 months, gently nourishing the soil with various nutrients. Raw wool contains 50% carbon, 14.6% nitrogen, 5% sulfur, and some calcium, magnesium, iron, and other trace elements. You could say it's a slow-release fertilizer that doesn't harm plants, unlike other alternatives. Wool pellets also improve soil porosity. Do you know what soil porosity means for plants? It's the foundation for healthy growth and active root development. There are also snails. Despite their harmless appearance, they're one of the main enemies of anyone involved in growing plants. Turns out that if you surround a growing plant with wool pellets, you create a protective barrier that snails and slugs simply can't crawl over. It's not that the wool has anything bad for the snails in it, but the tiny spikes in the wool fibers cause irritation for the unwanted garden visitors. You know what mulch is? It's a material that's spread over the soil around a plant's stem. Mulch is made from organic stuff like bark chips, and its main purpose is to retain moisture, improve soil fertility and health, and reduce weed growth. Australians started using wool as mulch. You could say it's like mulch on steroids. This is a plume, and it's grown in Australia. In fact, if we go by information from 2024, the country earns $67 million a year from this product. Not a huge amount, but not too small either. The mulch made from sheep wool proved to work wonders with plums. The farmers took wool padding, added cornstarch to it, and covered the plum trees, which were planted in soil that wasn't very fertile. The results showed that this combination led to a 37% increase in fruit yield compared to the trees that didn't get the wool boost and were growing in poor soil. Plus, the weight and size of the fruits improved by 48.9%, and their nutritional qualities were found to be better as well. Sheep wool mulch was also used for growing strawberries, and yes, it worked great there too. In Australia, it's usually really hot, and the combination of that with low rainfall leads to soil degradation. Wool mulch minimized temperature fluctuations, reducing daytime and nighttime variations by 3.6 to 5.4 degrees on hot summer days. Also, the highly beneficial feature of wool to retain moisture was noted once again. The mulch creates a moist environment for plants during dry spells. These are wool blankets. How did they end up in our video? Well, they're made of wool, and in Australia, they turned them into compost. Why not? If all the other ways of using wool in the soil brought so many benefits, people thought if a blanket's 100% made of wool, a fully biodegradable material, then why not put it in the ground? They mixed the wool with food waste from food industry businesses and then wrapped it in mesh. After that, every week for the first 5 weeks, extra food scraps and carbon were added to mimic a home composting environment, plus everything was turned over every week. Basically, they were making compost. After a while, the compost, along with the blanket, was sent to the lab to check if it met the Australian compost standard for mineral contamination, heavy metals, and pesticides. The test showed the product can be used as a soil conditioner or food for growing healthy plants. It has a balanced level of important minerals like nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, and contains a set of trace elements such as zinc, copper, and iron. Plus, the compost turned out to be an ideal source of organic matter. Then, the compost was used in community gardens to grow nutrient-rich food. The result speaks for itself. This literally opens up new opportunities for other rejected 100% wool products like sweaters and everything else. If they find a defect, they send it to some soil that's not great for farming, making the country's land a bit more fertile. A perfect plan. Wool that hasn't been turned into any clothing items yet is also used for compost. In fact, some studies have shown that wool doesn't even need to be processed. It can be successfully used as a source of nutrients and a growing medium. In this case, plant roots grow directly on the wool fibers, so literally no extra steps. Unsold wool can be sent to degraded soil instead of a landfill. Its fertility will improve, making it possible to grow plants in places where it's nearly impossible under normal conditions. What other ways can you use unnecessary sheep wool to improve soil fertility? Some Australian companies asked themselves the same question, and as a result, liquid fertilizer was created. In this form, wool is the most convenient way to improve soil fertility. Why? It's easier to store. You can pour the fertilizer into cans, bottles, jugs, or pretty much anywhere because liquid wool fertilizer is just liquid. Plus, it doesn't have any harmful properties, so you don't need to search for any containers that, like in the case of acid, can withstand corrosion. It's also easier to spread across the soil since you can use sprayers and special equipment, and all the beneficial properties are preserved. Manufacturers specifically point out amino acids. They help plants fight stress, increase root mass, and activate natural defense mechanisms, plus they boost photosynthesis by increasing chlorophyll concentration. And amino acids attract water molecules, helping the soil retain moisture better. It's also a great food source for microorganisms that promote plant growth. In short, you get it, it's all good. Except liquid wool fertilizer doesn't help with snails, there are no sharp fibers. This all sounds like the perfect strategy to save huge barren lands in Australia and turn them into green spaces. Why not? Tons of unused, literally excess wool are a great solution for improving soil fertility. The country could also complement all this with wool usage practices from other countries. Let's move to Norway. There's the Ascent Project, a joint initiative aimed at solving environmental problems in the mountain regions of Northern Europe. What's wool got to do with this? Well, it's used to repair paths in the marshy areas. They're disappearing due to one simple and widely recognized cause: erosion. When grass or other vegetation gets trampled, the soil is exposed and starts to be affected by the elements. Rain washes away the soil, which leads to trails slowly turning into channels where water flows. It becomes harder to walk on the trails, so people usually start walking on the sides. This again leads to trampling, exposure, and erosion. In other words, once the process starts, it won't stop by itself, and you need to take some action. For example, use geotextile. It's laid down so that the paths don't turn into channels. However, it often ends up on the surface after a while and slowly breaks down, leaving foreign material in the ground, or even worse, when it gets scattered across the landscape by the wind. That's why the Norwegians invented, actually as the project participants themselves claim, no one invented anything. Remnants of sheep wool were found in old Roman roads, so it was just a matter of figuring out what the material was used for and how it was used. The Norwegians figured it out and are now preparing the land, laying down enough wool, and then adding other elements like gravel. After all this, the woolen path will be springy, which isn't all that comfortable, but after a while it turns into a regular trail. Moreover, based on the analysis of other places where this same approach was used, the woolen path stays in perfect condition even 10 years later. If you've been watching our videos, you've probably heard a lot about the Gobi Desert, which China's trying to green. But today, let's not focus on China. Let's take a look at what the second country with a part of the desert, Mongolia, is doing. The Mongols realized that planting trees in soil that's as dry and inhospitable as possible is more of a not great decision because the survival rate really suffers. There aren't many useful micronutrients there, after all, since the soil is called infertile for a reason. Plus, there are no barriers to the wind, so the roots of the trees get exposed and gradually ruined by the blowing sand. The conditions in the Mongolian part of the Gobi Desert are pretty much as terrible as in the Chinese part. Tiny amounts of rainfall, very high or low temperatures. We think you get how this affects the growth of trees and other plants. Because of all this, survival rates are close to zero, which doesn't sound like good news for anyone involved in greening the desert. So the Mongols decided to use sheep wool, or rather fertilizer made from the pellets we've already mentioned. Applying from 2 to 11 tons of wool fertilizer per 2.4 acres significantly increased the nutrient content in the soil and plant growth. In other words, soil that was completely unsuitable for growing turned into what could be called a relatively good spot for planting. There was, of course, no vegetation cover in the desert. To be more precise, there was some, but desert grass and the hardiest trees with massive roots, which allowed them to reach water deep down, accounted for a meager 1%. These plants could pretty much grow anywhere thanks to their survival skills, probably even on Mars. but they don't really help in greening the desert. And other plants definitely aren't part of that 1%. However, after using wool fertilizer, the vegetation cover increased from 1% to 50 to 60%. That said, it's important to note that the increase in vegetation cover didn't mean that more of those hardy bushes and trees that can survive anywhere were growing on infertile lands. The plant species diversity in the studied area increased by 40% compared to untreated lands. As a result, science has concluded that wool is a more effective way to improve soil fertility and restore vegetation than mineral alternatives. Will this be useful in Australia? You bet. Australian deserts cover an area of about 502,000 square miles, or 18% of the Australian mainland. At the same time, 35% of the Australian continent gets so little rainfall that it's practically a desert. Some parts of this dry desert area have at least a bit of greenery with small shrubs and especially hardy trees. However, there are also deserts that can be compared to the Sahara, meaning they're filled with sand that's constantly blown around by the wind because it's not held in place by any plants. This leads to the expansion of desert areas, and they'd surely like to stop this process in Australia. As we've already mentioned, the country has very little fertile land anyway. Given all of this, it's obvious that Australia could adopt the Mongolian method of turning desert land into something more or less fertile with the help of sheep wool. Wool works, and it works really well, so this land fertilization technique could soon spread across the globe.